The stars looked like tiny diamonds against the black sky as Nexus Station slowly turned in space. The station was huge, bigger than most cities on Earth. It had been built by 5 different alien races working together, and it showed. Some parts looked like they were made of crystal that glowed with soft light. Other sections were covered in metal that seemed to move and change shape. The whole thing looked like someone had taken 5 different buildings and stuck them together. Ambassador Dae-ho Kim floated near one of the big windows in the human section of the station. He wore his best diplomatic uniform, dark blue with simple silver buttons. His black hair was cut short and neat. He had been a ship captain in Earth's Navy before becoming a diplomat, and he still stood like a soldier even when there was no gravity to worry about. "The other delegates are arriving," said Sora Park as she floated up beside him. She was younger than Dae-ho, maybe 30 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her job was to study military things and give advice. She carried a small computer pad that showed the movements of ships around the station. "How many?" asked Dae-ho. "All 5 races sent their best people," Sora said, "and their biggest ships." Through the window they could see other vessels docked at the station. Each ship looked completely different. One looked like it was made of living bone that curved and twisted. Another seemed to be built from pure light that hurt to look at directly. A third ship appeared to be breathing, its hull moving in and out like lungs. "They really want to show off this year," Dae-ho said quietly. The annual military demonstration happened every year. Each race brought their most powerful warship to show the others what they could do. It was supposed to keep peace in the galaxy. If everyone knew how strong everyone else was, the thinking went, nobody would start a war they could not win. But Dae-ho knew the real reason the aliens had this meeting. They wanted to remind each other who was in charge. Humans had only joined the Galactic Council 2 years ago. Before that, these 5 races had ruled space for thousands of years. "Sir," Sora said, looking at her computer, "we should head to the main meeting room. The opening ceremony starts in 10 minutes. They pushed off from the window and floated through the corridors of the station. The human section was small compared to the others. Everything was painted white and gray, very clean and simple. The alien sections were much fancier. As they floated past the Saurid area, they could see walls covered in what looked like dragon scales. The luminary section glowed so brightly that humans needed special glasses to look at it. Other diplomats floated through the halls. Most of them were much taller than humans. The Saurids looked like giant lizards that walked on 2 legs. They had long tails and sharp teeth that they liked to show when they smiled. The Vorthak looked like huge insects with 4 arms and wings that buzzed when they moved. The Nexari were even stranger. They looked like walking crystal formations that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. The main meeting room was enormous. It had to be, to fit all the different types of beings that used it. The center was filled with a breathable atmosphere for races that needed air. Around the edges were tanks of different gases and liquids for beings that could not survive in normal air. Dae-ho and Sora took their seats at a small table marked with Earth's symbol. Around them, the alien delegates were much more impressive. Admiral Veltar of the Saurids wore armor made from the scales of some giant space creature. His yellow eyes looked at the humans like they were something he might eat for lunch. Commander Thys of the Luminary did not have a solid body. She was made of living light that constantly shifted between different colors. When she spoke, her voice sounded like music played on crystal bells. The Vorthak delegate was called Krex, but Dae-ho knew that was not really a name. The Vorthak were a hive mind. Krex was just the part of the group mind that they sent to talk to other races. It looked like a giant beetle with arms that ended in sharp claws. War Chief Gorham of the Nexari looked like someone had carved a person out of purple crystal. Light moved through his body in patterns that probably meant something, but humans had never figured out what. The strangest delegate was Sky Marshal Zilf of the Aryan. The Aryan were made of gas like living clouds. Zilf floated in a special container that let her keep her shape while still being able to move around. "Welcome," said a voice that came from speakers all around the room. "Today we gather for the annual military demonstration. As always, each member race will present their finest warship and demonstrate its capabilities." Admiral Veltar stood up first. He was almost 3 meters tall and his armor made scraping sounds when he moved. "The Saurid Empire has ruled the Outer Rim for 5,000 years, he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Our ships have conquered 100 worlds. Today you will see why." Commander Thys floated higher, her light growing brighter. The Luminary Collective has mastered the power of stars themselves. Our vessels travel on roads made of pure energy. We bring light to the darkness of space. Krex's wings buzzed as the hive mind spoke through him. The Vorthak swarm grows stronger with each victory. Our ships are alive, always learning, always adapting. We are evolution itself. War Chief Gorham's crystal body rang like a bell when he moved. The Nixari hegemony builds ships that last forever. Our vessels are cut from the heart of dead planets. Time cannot touch what we create. Sky Marshal Zilf's gaseous form swirled in her container. The Aryan Confederacy rides the winds between worlds. Our ships control the very air and weather of space. We are the storm that comes. All eyes turned to the human table. Deho stood up slowly. He looked very small compared to the aliens around him. The United Human Federation is honored to participate, he said simply. We look forward to learning from all of you. Some of the aliens made sounds that might have been laughter. Admiral Veltar's tail swept back and forth like he was amused. How refreshing, he said. Honesty about one's limitations. Sora wrote something on her computer pad, but her face showed nothing. Deho sat back down and folded his hands. Very well, said the station's computer voice. Let the demonstrations begin. Admiral Veltar stepped forward, his clawed feet clicking against the metal floor. The big screen in the meeting room showed his ship floating in space near the station. The vessel looked like some giant monster from an old Earth movie. It was 3 kilometers long and covered in scales that moved and shifted like they were alive. Behold the Bone Crusher, Veltar said, his voice full of pride. Built from the living bone of the great serpent of Kelos. Watch and learn what real power looks like. The ship on the screen began to glow. The scales along its hull started changing color, going from dark gray to bright red. Small weapons emerged from hidden spots all over the surface like teeth growing from the ship's skin. Our armor regenerates, Veltar explained. Observe. A small asteroid was pushed into view by a robot ship. The Bone Crusher fired a single blast from one of its main guns. The asteroid exploded into 1,000,000 pieces. But then something amazing happened. The pieces all flew toward the Saurid ship and stuck to its hull. In just a few minutes, the scales had absorbed all the rock and metal, making the ship even bigger and stronger. Any damage we take only makes us stronger, Veltar said. Our enemies feed us their own weapons. Commander Thace floated higher, her light body shifting to a bright golden color. Impressive, she said, though her musical voice sounded bored. For those who still think in terms of crude matter, the screen changed to show her ship. At first it looked like there was nothing there. Then slowly a shape began to appear. It was made of pure light, like someone had built a ship out of captured starfire. The vessel was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The Starweaver exists in 7 dimensions, Thys said. Your simple minds can only see one of them. The light ship suddenly vanished completely. For a moment there was nothing on the screen but empty space. Then it reappeared on the other side of the testing area, thousands of kilometers away. We do not travel through space, Thys continued. We step between the spaces that exist behind reality. No weapon can touch what does not fully exist in your dimension. To prove her point, the robot ships fired missiles at the Starweaver. The weapons passed right through the light ship like it was not there. Then the Luminary vessel fired back. A beam of concentrated starlight shot out, so bright that the camera had to dim itself to keep from being damaged. The beam hit a small moon that was being used as a target. The moon did not explode. Instead, it began to glow and then slowly dissolved into nothing but light and heat. We do not destroy, Thys said. We transform. We turn matter back into the energy it was meant to be. Krex buzzed his wings and stepped forward. The insect-like alien's forearms moved in complex patterns as he spoke. The hive mind calculates amusing displays, he said. But you still think like individuals. Watch and learn collective efficiency. His ship appeared on the screen, and Deho had to stop himself from making a face. The Vorthak vessel looked like it was alive because it was. The hull moved like skin, covered in what looked like veins that pulsed with green light. Parts of the ship opened and closed like mouths breathing. The 1,000 minds grow stronger with each battle, Krex explained. It learns, it adapts, it reproduces. As they watched, the ship began to split apart, first into 2 pieces, then 4, then 8. In just a few minutes, there were hundreds of smaller ships flying around like a swarm of angry bees. Each one moved perfectly with all the others, as if controlled by a single mind. Individual ships can be destroyed, Krex said, but the swarm learns from every death. Each loss makes the collective smarter. The swarm ships suddenly came together and fired on another test asteroid. But instead of energy weapons, they shot some kind of green acid. Where the acid hit, the rock began to dissolve. The smaller ships flew through the cloud of dissolved material, absorbing it into their hulls. In minutes, the asteroid was gone and the swarm had grown larger. "We do not just defeat our enemies," Krek said. "We consume them. We add their strengths to our own." War Chief Goram stepped forward, his crystal body ringing like a bell with each step. Light moved through his transparent form in patterns that hurt human eyes to follow. "Children playing with toys," he said in a voice like breaking glass. "The Nexari build for eternity." His ship appeared on the screen, and it was unlike anything the others had shown. It looked like an enormous cut diamond floating in space, but one that was constantly changing shape. The crystal faces moved and rotated, creating new patterns every second. "The diamond aegis is not built," Goram said. "It is grown from the compressed heart of a dead star. It cannot be destroyed because it exists in a state of perfect mathematical harmony." To demonstrate, the robot ships fired every kind of weapon they had at the crystal ship. Energy beams, missiles, projectiles that moved at incredible speed. Everything that hit the ship simply vanished. The crystal faces absorbed the energy and redirected it into new configurations. "We do not fight," Goram said. "We achieve perfect balance. Chaos becomes order. Destruction becomes creation." The crystal ship began to sing. The sound came through the station's speakers, a complex harmony that seemed to reach into the listener's bones. As it sang, the wreckage from all the previous tests began to move. Pieces of destroyed asteroids and spent missiles flew toward the diamond aegis and arranged themselves into perfect geometric shapes. "Matter obeys mathematical law," Goram explained. "We simply remind it of its proper form." Finally, Sky Marshal Zilf swirled in her container, her gaseous form taking on darker colors. "Solid beings," she said in a voice like wind through caves. "Always so concerned with things that can be touched. The Aryan command forces you cannot see." Her ship was the strangest yet. It looked like a storm cloud that had been given shape and purpose. Lightning flickered constantly within its dark form, and wisps of gas trailed behind it like ghostly tentacles. "The wind of annihilation does not exist in your limited understanding of matter," Zilf said. "We are the storm between stars. We are the force that shapes worlds." The storm ship began to spin faster and faster. As it moved, space around it began to change. Gas and dust that had been floating peacefully suddenly began to move in violent patterns. What looked like a hurricane formed in the vacuum of space with the Aryan ship at its center. "We control the very atmosphere of space itself," Zilf continued. "We bring weather to places that have never known wind." Lightning began to arc between nearby asteroids, even though there was no air to carry it. The electrical discharges grew stronger and stronger until they formed a web of energy, spanning thousands of kilometers. Then, with a sound like thunder that somehow carried through space, the lightning struck one of the test moons. The entire satellite was torn apart by winds that should not have been able to exist in vacuum. "We are not bound by your simple understanding of physics," Zilf said. "We are the exception that proves your rules are incomplete." Each alien had finished their demonstration, and each one looked more pleased with themselves than the last. They turned to look at the small human table with expressions that ranged from amusement to barely concealed contempt. "Well," said Admiral Veltar, his tail swishing with satisfaction, "that was educational. Now let us see what the newest members of our council have brought to show us." Sora looked at her computer and then whispered something to Deho. The human ambassador stood up slowly, looking thoughtful. "Actually," he said in his calm voice, "our ship is still in transit. Would it be possible to wait a little longer?" The aliens looked at each other. Some made sounds that were clearly laughter. Others just stared at the humans with expressions of disbelief. "In transit?" asked Commander Thys, her light form flickering with what might have been amusement. "Did you perhaps send your ship by slower than light travel?" "Or maybe," suggested Krex, his wings buzzing with the sound of the hive mind's collective laughter, "they brought a cargo vessel by mistake." Deho just smiled politely and sat back down. "Admiral Wan is very precise about timing," he said. "She will arrive exactly when she said she would." The aliens shared looks that said they thought humans were even more primitive than they had imagined. The silence in the meeting room stretched for several long seconds. The 5 alien delegates stared at the humans with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright amusement. Admiral Veltar was the first to break the quiet, his deep voice rumbling with barely contained laughter. "Still in transit?" he repeated, his yellow eyes gleaming. "Ambassador Kim, surely you understand that this demonstration was scheduled months in advance. How could your military not plan accordingly?" Daeho remained calm, his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him. "Admiral Wan operates on a very precise schedule," he said simply. "She has never been late for anything in her entire career." Commander Thys floated higher, her light form shifting to colors that hurt human eyes to look at directly. "Perhaps," she said in her musical voice, "the humans have brought one of their cargo vessels by mistake. We would understand such confusion. Your technology is still quite developing." The other aliens made sounds that were clearly expressions of amusement. War Chief Goram's crystal body rang like wind chimes as he shook with what passed for laughter among his people. The light patterns moving through his transparent form became faster and more complex. "The Nexari archives contain records of early human spaceflights," Goram said, his voice like breaking glass. "Chemical rockets that barely escaped their own gravity well. Perhaps they still use such primitive methods." Krex buzzed his wings, the sound growing louder as more of the hive mind focused its attention on the conversation. "The collective calculates that human vessels likely achieve 1/10 light speed at maximum. Their precise schedule probably requires several standard months to travel between systems." Sky Marshal Zilf swirled in her container, her gaseous form taking on darker, stormier colors. "The Aryan remember when the first human ships entered our territory," she said, her voice like wind through empty caves. "They moved so slowly that our weather patrols mistook them for floating debris." Sora wrote something on her computer pad, her face showing no emotion. She had been taking notes throughout all the alien demonstrations, asking technical questions that the aliens had assumed were signs of primitive curiosity. Now she simply continued writing as if the mockery did not bother her at all. "Tell me, Ambassador," said Veltar, leaning forward with his massive arms crossed. "What type of vessel are we waiting for? Surely you can share some basic specifications." Daeho considered the question for a moment. "It's a standard patrol ship," he said finally. "Nothing too impressive by your standards, I'm sure." This caused another round of laughter from the aliens. Admiral Veltar's tail swept back and forth with amusement. "A patrol ship?" he said. "You brought a patrol ship to demonstrate against our finest battleships?" "Perhaps they confused the purpose of this gathering," suggested Thys. "This is a military demonstration, not a trade conference." Krex's four arms gestured in complex patterns. "The hive mind suggests the humans may have sent their most powerful vessel, and it simply appears weak compared to true warships." Goram's crystal form rang with harmonious tones that sounded almost like music. "The mathematical probability is high," he said, "that what humans call a battleship would register as a shuttlecraft on our sensors." The aliens began to speak among themselves, sometimes forgetting that the humans were still in the room. Their conversations were not quiet, and Daeho and Sora could hear every word. "I still say they should not have been admitted to the council so quickly," Veltar said to Thys. 200 years of spaceflight is nothing. We have individual officers older than their entire space program." "The Luminari Collective agrees," Thys replied, her light form shifting to cooler colors. "But the council voted, and here we are. At least this demonstration will show the other races why experience matters." Krex buzzed to Goram. "The collective calculates that human space will be divided among the 5 major powers within 50 standard years. Their primitive technology cannot sustain expansion into contested areas. The Nexari have already identified several human colonies that would benefit from proper administration," Goram responded, his crystal body chiming softly. "Their mining operations are inefficient. We could improve output by 700%. Zilf swirled toward the others. "The Aryan have little interest in solid worlds," she said, "but their gas giant stations could serve as useful supply points for our storm fleets." The humans continued to sit quietly at their small table. Sora had stopped writing and was now simply watching the aliens with calm, analytical eyes. Daeho looked like he was thinking about something completely different, perhaps remembering a conversation from years ago. "Ambassador Kim," called out Veltar, turning his attention back to the humans. "Since we are waiting anyway, perhaps you could tell us more about this Admiral Wan of yours." "Is she one of your most experienced commanders?" "Admiral Wan graduated from the Naval Academy 40 years ago," Daeho said. She's commanded everything from single-pilot scouts to deep space exploration vessels. 40 years, repeated Thys with amusement. How charming. I have been commanding starships for 4 centuries. The collective has been waging war for millennia. Added, corrects an individual experience is less important than accumulated knowledge. My current crystal form has existed for 800 years, said Gorham. Before that, I was part of the Great Harmony for 3,000 more. Zilf's gaseous form darkened. The Aryan do not measure time as solid beings do. We exist in the eternal storm between moments. And yet, said Sora, speaking for the first time in several minutes, Admiral Wan has never lost a ship under her command. The aliens looked at her with surprise. It was unusual for a military attaché to speak during diplomatic meetings unless directly addressed. Never lost a ship? Asked Veltar. In 40 years? How many battles has she fought? I'm not at liberty to discuss operational details, Sora said calmly. But Admiral Wan's record speaks for itself. The aliens exchanged glances that suggested they thought this was either a lie or proof that humans had never faced serious opposition. Of course she has never lost a ship, said Thys. The humans have never fought anyone capable of destroying one. Their idea of a battle probably involves disputes with pirates or asteroid. Miners, suggested Gorham. Krex's wings buzzed louder. The collective has reviewed human conflict records. Most of their wars were fought with primitive chemical weapons on a single planet. Until they met us, added Zilf, they had never encountered real military technology. The station's computer announced that refreshments were being served in the adjoining chamber. Most of the aliens moved to continue their conversations over food and drink, suited to their different biologies. The humans remained at their table. They seem very confident, Sora said quietly to Deho. They have reason to be, he replied. Those are impressive ships they showed us. Sir, Sora said, checking her computer. Admiral Wan's estimated arrival time is in 37 minutes. Deho nodded. Right on schedule. Through the large windows of the meeting room, they could see the alien warships floating in space around the station. The Bone Crusher looked like a massive predator waiting to strike. The Star Weaver flickered in and out of visibility like a living star. The Thousand Mines had reformed into its single configuration, but smaller ships still buzzed around it like insects around a hive. The Diamond Aegis rotated slowly, its crystal faces catching and reflecting light in mathematical patterns. The Wind of Annihilation looked like a storm cloud that had learned to hold its shape. Each ship represented thousands of years of development and refinement. Each one had been built by a civilization that had conquered multiple star systems and defeated countless enemies. Do you think they'll be surprised? Asked Sora. Deho was quiet for a long moment, watching the alien ships through the window. I think, he said finally, that they're about to learn something new about the universe. The silence in the meeting room was so complete that the only sound was the soft hum of the station's life support systems. The 5 alien delegates stared at the main screen, where the impossible human ship floated like a dark mountain in space. Each of them was trying to process what they were seeing with sensors and instruments that insisted the readings were impossible. Admiral Wan's voice came through the speakers, as calm and professional as someone discussing the weather. Thank you for your patience. We will now begin our standard demonstration. First, we will show basic defensive capabilities. Basic? Whispered Commander Thys, her light form flickering with colors that indicated deep confusion. On the screen, they could see the UHFS Indomitable rotating slowly to present different angles to the camera. The strange geometric patterns on its hull pulsed with contained energy, and space itself seemed to bend around the vessel in ways that hurt to look at directly. All participating vessels are invited to test our defensive systems. Admiral Wan continued. Please use whatever level of force you consider appropriate. Admiral Veltar found his voice first, though it cracked slightly when he spoke. You want us to fire on your ship? If you would be so kind, Admiral Wan replied. Standard testing protocols. The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Their own demonstrations had involved firing on asteroids and small moons, not on each other's ships. But Admiral Wan had specifically requested it. Very well, said Veltar, his warrior instincts overcoming his confusion. If you insist on this test. He activated his communication systems and gave orders to the Bone Crusher. On the screen, they could see the Saurid dreadnought turning to face the human ship. Its massive plasma cannons, the same weapons that had cracked moons during the earlier demonstration, began to charge with deadly energy. The Saurid Empire does not take responsibility for damage to your vessel, Veltar said formally. Understood, Admiral Wan replied calmly. The Bone Crusher fired. The plasma blast that erupted from its main guns was bright enough to be seen from several star systems away. It was the same weapon that had destroyed a small moon just hours earlier. The energy beam struck the human ship directly, and simply ceased to exist. The plasma blast did not bounce off armor or get absorbed by shields. It did not explode or dissipate. It hit the Indomitable and vanished as if it had never existed at all. Interesting energy, Admiral Wan commented. Our reality anchors registered a minor fluctuation. Please feel free to use your most powerful weapons. Veltar's mouth hung open, showing all of his sharp teeth. Reality anchors? Standard defensive technology, Admiral Wan explained. We lock spacetime in a fixed state around our vessels. Energy that conflicts with our chosen reality simply fails to exist. Commander Thys blazed brighter, her light form cycling through colors rapidly. The Luminary Collective will test this claim, she said, her musical voice now sharp with challenge. The Starweaver began to glow with the power of captured starlight. When it fired, the beam was so intense that the camera systems had to dim automatically to prevent damage. The concentrated stellar energy that had dissolved an entire moon struck the human ship. Once again, the energy simply vanished upon contact. Fascinating use of stellar mechanics, Admiral Wan said, with what sounded like genuine interest. Though I should mention that we prefer not to use stars as weapons. They tend to have planets around them with living beings. Krex's wings began to buzz frantically as the hive mind processed this impossible information. The collective demands explanation. No defensive system can simply negate energy. This violates fundamental laws. Oh, we are not negating anything, Admiral Wan replied cheerfully. We are simply choosing which laws of physics apply in our local area. It is quite simple once you understand the mathematics. One by one, the other alien ships fired their most powerful weapons at the Indomitable. The Vorthax swarm launched acidic projectiles that had dissolved asteroids. The Nixari crystal ship fired resonance beams that shattered matter at the atomic level. The Aryan storm vessel hurled lightning that arced across impossible distances. Every attack simply vanished when it touched the human ship. Excellent, said Admiral Wan when the barrage was complete. Now we will demonstrate standard offensive capabilities. Standard? Repeated War Chief Goram, his crystal form ringing with distress. Nothing too impressive, Admiral Wan assured them. We will use a simple kinetic projectile. On the screen they could see a small opening appear in the Indomitable's hull. Something tiny emerged from it, no bigger than a grain of sand. But the space around the projectile began to distort in ways that made the station's sensors scream warnings. Projectile velocity is 99.9% of light speed, Admiral Wan announced casually. We would go faster, but that tends to cause problems with causality. The tiny projectile struck the Bone Crusher's hull. The Saurid dreadnought's regenerating armor, which had absorbed an entire asteroid during the earlier demonstration, simply parted around the projectile like it was not there. The grain of sand passed completely through 3 kilometers of living bone and emerged from the other side, leaving a perfectly circular hole. The ship's regeneration systems tried to repair the damage, but the hole remained. Something about the projectile had made it impossible for the living armor to heal. Apologies for the damage, Admiral Wan said. The projectile was accelerated using temporal mechanics. Your armor is trying to heal a wound that exists in several different time periods simultaneously. Admiral Veltar stared at his ship in shock. The Bone Crusher had survived battles with entire fleets. Its armor had never failed to regenerate from any damage, and the humans had punched through it with a grain of sand. Temporal mechanics, he whispered. Now we will demonstrate emergency mobility, Admiral Wan continued. The Indomitable, all 15 kilometers of it simply vanished. There was no flash of light, no energy signature, no distortion of space. One moment the ship was there, the next it was gone. The camera system searched frantically but found nothing. Then the ship reappeared 50,000 kilometers away, on the opposite side of the testing area. Again, there was no transition, no travel time. It had simply stopped existing in one place and started existing in another. We do not travel through space, Admiral Wan explained. We redefine our position in the universe, much more efficient than conventional faster-than-light travel. Sky Marshal Zilf's gaseous form was swirling in tight, panicked spirals. This is impossible. Matter cannot simply relocate without crossing the intervening space. Finally, we will demonstrate our tactical scanning array, Admiral Wan said. Suddenly, every alien ship's internal displays lit up with information they had never seen before. Detailed schematics of their own vessels appeared on their screens, showing every corridor, every room, every piece of equipment. The current location and vital signs of every crew member were displayed in perfect detail. Your ships are quite interesting, Admiral Wan commented. Though I notice your shield harmonics are rather inefficient, and your weapon power distribution could be improved by about 40%. The aliens stared at their screens in horror. The humans had scanned through every defense they possessed without triggering a single alarm or detection system. How? Asked Thais, her voice barely audible. Standard sensor technology, Admiral Wan replied. We examine objects at the quantum level and reconstruct their macro properties. Your shields operate in normal spacetime, so they cannot block sensors that function outside standard physics. Admiral Wan's voice continued with the same calm, professional tone she had used throughout the demonstration. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in these annual demonstrations. For reference, the human fleet designation for vessels similar to those you have shown today is training targets. We use them to help our new recruits practice their targeting skills. The communication channel fell silent for a moment. Then Admiral Wan added, almost as an afterthought, we hope this demonstration promotes better understanding between our peoples. Admiral Wan out. The 5 alien delegates sat in stunned silence. Each of them was beginning to understand that humanity had not simply joined the galactic community as a junior member. They had been quietly developing technology so advanced that the greatest warships of 5 ancient civilizations were, quite literally, obsolete. Dae-ho stood up from the human table and smoothed down his uniform. Thank you all for a very educational day, he said politely. Sora has prepared some follow-up diplomatic meetings for anyone interested in discussing technology sharing agreements. Sora looked up from her computer pad with a pleasant smile. I have openings next week if anyone would like to schedule talks about improved relations between our peoples. Admiral Veltar tried to speak, but found that his voice was not working properly. Commander Thys had dimmed to barely visible levels, her light form flickering weakly. Krex's wings hung motionless as the hive mind struggled to process information that broke all their understanding of what was possible. War Chief Goram's crystal body had gone completely dark, all the light patterns frozen in place. Sky Marshal Zilf had compressed herself into a tight ball of terrified gas. Through the windows of the meeting room, they could see the UHFS Indomitable floating peacefully in space. The aliens had returned to the meeting room after their break, looking more relaxed and even more amused than before. Admiral Veltar stretched his massive frame and yawned, showing rows of sharp teeth. Commander Thys floated lazily near the ceiling, her light form cycling through pleasant colors. The mood in the room was almost festive. So, said Veltar, settling back into his chair with a satisfied expression. How much longer must we wait for this mysterious human vessel? Dae-ho checked the time display on the wall. Admiral Wan said she would arrive at exactly 1400 hours station time. Krex's wings buzzed with amusement. The collective calculates that it is now 1359 hours and 40 seconds. Are humans truly so precise, or is this another example of primitive overconfidence? One has never been late, Sora said simply, not looking up from her computer pad. War Chief Goram's crystal body chimed softly. The Nixari appreciate punctuality. It is a mathematical virtue. However, precision requires the ability to control variables. Can primitive technology truly achieve such control? Sky Marshal Zilf swirled in her container. The Aryan find the concept amusing. Time flows differently in the storm. Solid beings and their rigid schedules. The time display clicked to 1400 hours exactly. At that precise moment, the station's communication system crackled to life. The voice that came through the speakers was calm, professional, and clearly human. Nexus Station, this is Admiral Boram Wan aboard the United Human Federation ship Indomitable, requesting permission to approach for scheduled diplomatic demonstration. The aliens looked around the room with expressions of mild interest. Finally, some entertainment. Veltar leaned forward to look at the main display screen, expecting to see a small human vessel approaching from the distance. Permission granted. UHFS Indomitable, replied the station's automated systems. Please transmit your approach vector and vessel specifications. Approach vector is directly above your current position, came Admiral Wan's voice. Vessel specifications will be apparent upon visual contact. Thighs flickered to a brighter color. Directly above? Their sensors must be malfunctioning. There is nothing on our long-range detection grid. Gorham's crystal form rang with what sounded like laughter. Perhaps they are approaching from very far away. Primitive sensors might not detect nearby objects. On the main screen, space looked completely empty. The camera system showed the usual field of stars, the distant glow of the system's sun, and the 5 alien warships floating around the station. Nothing else was visible. Station sensors show no approaching vessels, announced the computer. That's strange, said Krex, his forearms gesturing as the hive mind processed information. Human communication systems indicated proximity, but collective instruments detect nothing. Veltar growled with impatience. Perhaps their ship is too small for our sensors to notice. Some kind of courier vessel or personal transport. The Luminari can detect objects as small as escape pods at 50,000 kilometers, said Thais. If there were anything approaching, we would see it. Admiral Wan's voice came through the speakers again, as calm as before. Beginning final approach. All stations please maintain minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers. 50,000 kilometers, repeated Zilf, her gaseous form swirling faster. That is the safety distance for capital ship weapons testing. Why would a patrol vessel require such clearance? Sora looked up from her computer for the first time. Admiral Wan tends to be very careful about safety protocols. Careful about what? Asked Veltar. There is nothing out there to be careful about. The main screen suddenly filled with warning lights. Emergency alerts began flashing across all the displays in the room. The station's computer voice, usually calm and measured, now carried an urgent tone. Warning. Massive gravitational anomaly detected. Warning. Space-time distortion in progress. All vessels maintain emergency distance. The alien stopped laughing. Veltar jumped to his feet, his claws scraping against the floor. Theis's light form blazed brighter as she focused her attention on the sensor readings. Gorham's crystal body began ringing like an alarm bell. What kind of approach creates gravitational anomalies? Demanded Krex, his wings buzzing with agitation. The stars on the main screen began to bend. Space itself seemed to twist and curve, as if something incredibly massive were approaching, but there was still nothing visible on any of their sensors. This is impossible, said Thys, her musical voice now sharp with concern. Nothing can distort space-time without massive energy expenditure. Where is the energy signature? Gorham's crystal form was ringing continuously now, mathematical patterns of light racing through his transparent body. The calculations do not resolve. The gravitational effects suggest an object of enormous mass, but our instruments detect no matter. Admiral Wan's voice came through the speakers one more time, still perfectly calm. Final approach complete. Beginning demonstration protocols. At that moment, reality seemed to tear open directly above Nexus Station. The tear started small, just a thin line of absolute blackness against the star field. Then it began to grow, spreading wider and longer until it formed a massive oval shape. Through the tear, the aliens could see something that their minds struggled to understand. It was dark. Not black like space, but dark in a way that seemed to absorb light itself. As the tear widened, the shape of something enormous began to emerge. It was clearly artificial, clearly a ship, but unlike anything in any of their databases. The vessel that came through the tear was 15 kilometers long. Its hull appeared to be made of some unknown material that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Strange geometric patterns pulsed along its surface, containing energies that made the station's sensors scream warnings about impossible readings. The UHFS Indomitable settled into position above Nexus Station, like a mountain deciding to float. It made no sound, produced no energy signatures that the alien sensors could understand, and seemed to follow laws of physics that were different from everything else in the universe. By the Great Serpent, whispered Veltar, his voice barely audible. What manner of technology is this? Theis's light form was flickering rapidly, cycling through colors that indicated extreme confusion and concern. The energy patterns are beyond our comprehension. This should not be possible. Krex's wings had stopped buzzing entirely. For the first time in the hive mind's history, the collective was speechless. The mathematical models that governed Vorthak, understanding simply had no framework for what they were seeing. Goram's crystal body had gone completely silent. The light patterns that normally moved through his form had frozen in place, as if his consciousness itself had stopped working. Zilf's gaseous form was swirling in tight, agitated spirals. The atmospheric readings are impossible. The ship exists in normal space but does not interact with normal space. How can matter behave this way? The alien warships that had seemed so impressive just minutes before now looked like toys floating next to a real ship. The Bone Crusher, with its 3-kilometer length, was dwarfed by the human vessel. The Starweaver's dimensional shifting seemed crude, compared to technology that could apparently tear holes in space itself. On the main screen, they could see their own ships being scanned. Not by energy beams or sensor arrays, but by something that reached through their shields and armor as if they were not there. Every system on every alien vessel was being examined and catalogued by instruments they could not detect or understand. "Their scanning technology is reading our internal systems," said Thys, her voice now barely a whisper. "Through full defensive shields, through hull armor, through dimensional barriers. This should not be possible." Admiral Wan's voice came through the speakers one final time, still carrying the same calm, professional tone she had used throughout. "Nexus Station, this is Admiral Wan. We are ready to begin our demonstration whenever convenient for the other participants. We appreciate your patience with our arrival timing." The 5 alien delegates sat in stunned silence, staring at the impossible ship floating above them. Each of them was beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about human technology had been completely wrong. Deho stood up from the human table, smoothing down his uniform. "Shall we proceed with the demonstration?" he asked politely, as if nothing unusual had happened.